In the shadowed corners of ancient temples, beneath the flickering lanterns where prayers fade into silence, there are stories not written in books, but whispered through incense smoke and rain-soaked stone. This is Whispers of Asia, where every tale is a forgotten ritual, every ghost carries the weight of memory, and every silence is haunted. Close your eyes, light a candle, and let the spirits speak. The sun slipped below the jungle ridge, bleeding the last of its gold across the weathered rooftops of Wat Kemaram. In the courtyard, the wind moved slowly, as though mindful not to disturb the sacred quiet that followed evening prayers. The scent of old incense and frangipane clung to the stone, and above it all rose the low, rhythmic murmur of monks chanting. Inside the main hall, candles flickered against the lacquered walls, casting soft halos around statues of the Enlightened One. Shadows bowed in meditation. Among them, cloaked in saffron, was Ajahn Brahm, a monk of many years, his face carved by time, his hands still and folded. Tonight, like every night, the ritual of remembrance had begun. At the altar, the head abbot unfurled the death register, a long parchment scroll kept bound in sacred silk. It bore names written in delicate calligraphy, monks and lay people who had passed, etched into memory and ritual, to be read aloud so that they may never be forgotten. Each name was a breath, a return, a call to the other side. Ajahn Sujat, May Noon of Ban Pradu, Luang Pi Tewa. The names were recited slowly, reverently. As the chanting wove its way through the hall, Brahm's lips moved in unison with the others, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He'd heard these names countless times, each one a footstep leading souls beyond the threshold. But tonight, he heard something different. Ajahn Brahm of Wat Kemaram, his own name. At first, he thought it a mistake, a slip of the tongue from the old abbot perhaps, eyes blurring with age, lips weary with repetition. But the name was read again and again, always near the end, always the same. Ajahn Brahm of Wat Kemaram. His breath caught. He turned his gaze toward the scroll, but dared not rise. The ceremony continued without interruption. No one looked startled, no one seemed to notice. The register was not a list of the living. He pressed his fingers to his chest, felt the rhythm of his pulse, alive, solid, here. Yet the words, those 5 syllables, clung to him like wet cloth. A chill began to crawl across his back, under his robes. He waited for someone, anyone, to turn to him and smile and say, "That cannot be right. You're among us still." But no one did. The ritual ended with 3 deep gongs of the temple bell, one for the body, one for the mind, one for the soul. Each reverberation echoed through the rafters and down into the silence that followed. Brahm remained still long after the others began to move, his fingers tightening slightly on the edge of his robe. Outside, the jungle sang in the language of crickets and rustling palms, but within him, a second silence had begun. Later that night, in the quiet of his quarters, Ajahn Brahm unwrapped a bundle of old manuscripts and scrolls he had copied over the years. He sat beside a dim oil lamp, the shadows of flame dancing across the parchment. He searched for his name, somewhere, anywhere, in rosters, in prayer books, in the archive scrolls of ordination. Gone. Not faded. Gone. Where once he had signed the vow of celibacy, of discipline, of refuge in the triple gem, there was now an empty space. The ink had not smudged, it had vanished. He opened a mirror box from the drawer, lit another stick of incense, and looked. No reflection. Only the flickering wall behind. He did not sleep that night. At dawn, the bells rang for alms round. The monks lined up in saffron procession, barefoot and serene, bowls in hand. But as Prom stepped into line, the monk behind him walked forward and filled the gap he had just occupied. A gentle smile, no acknowledgement, no bump, no pause. Prom turned, spoke, "Luang Pi Anand." No reply, as though wind had whispered his name into stone. That afternoon, he returned to the death register, hoping, praying that the name had been removed, that it was a mistake undone. But there it was, Ajahn Pram of Wat Kamaram. Inscribed in red ink, a sign not just of death, but of ritual passing, the kind read only for monks whose spirit had not yet moved on. Rare, feared, often silent. The ink was fresh, but his heart was heavy with something ancient. In the temple garden, the Bodhi tree rustled gently, its leaves like thin coins of green jade. Pram knelt beneath it, hands in prayer, but found no peace. The chanting echoed still, his name still lingering in the hall, on the scroll, on the lips of monks who no longer saw him. He remembered the words his old teacher once whispered when they first entered the monastery. A monk dies 3 times. First, when his family lets go. Second, when the temple reads his name. Third, when he burns the scroll himself. A chill passed through him like a wind from a forgotten grave. He stood. He bowed. Then he walked toward the bell tower, where beneath its hollow dome lay a chamber no longer spoken of, a chamber where the past is burned and names are offered to the flames. And in his hands he held a fresh scroll, his name written by his own ink. He was not ready to die, but he was about to disappear. Morning light seeped through the lattice windows of Wat Kemaram, soft and pale, painting the floor in patterns of bamboo and silence. The temple bell had long since been struck, but Ajahn Pram remained seated in his cell, cross-legged upon the straw mat, eyes open yet unfocused. The world around him felt thin, like a veil that could be lifted at any moment to reveal something waiting beneath. He had not spoken since dawn. In his hands, he turned a single bead from his mala rosary, a motion meant to calm the mind, to anchor the spirit. But even that rhythm faltered now. His heart refused to find the beat of prayer. Something else was pulsing inside him, something out of tune with the living. He rose slowly, robes whispering across the stone floor, and stepped into the long corridor that led toward the bell chamber. Dust motes danced in the light, each one catching in his throat like a small ghost. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper and sandalwood. At the corridor's end stood a door that few monks ever opened, the record room, where old scrolls, manuscripts, and the ashes of burned names were kept. The air within was cold, despite the morning heat. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their contents stacked in careful disarray. Death scrolls, meditation diaries, and relic inventories dating back hundreds of years. The silence was so deep, it seemed to hum. Prom bowed before entering. The wood beneath his fingers was slick with age. Inside, he moved by memory. He had copied many of these scrolls himself as a younger monk, his handwriting intertwined with those of long-dead brothers. Each curve of ink, each stroke of red seal carried the rhythm of devotion. He could almost hear their voices again. Then, amid the rows of silk bound, he found it, a scroll not listed in the visible archives, its fabric yellowed and brittle, sealed with dark wax, shaped like a lotus burned at its edge. When he touched it, the wax cracked like thin bone. He unrolled it slowly. There, written in elegant, deliberate strokes, Ajahn Brahm of Wat Kemaram, marked in vermilion, stamped with the seal of death, filed for the year to come. He stared until the characters began to shimmer. It was impossible. Each register was written only after a passing, never before. Yet this scroll predicted his death like a prophecy sealed in red. He looked for a mistake, perhaps another monk of the same name, but in the corner, in smaller script, he saw his own ordination mark, the single glyph of his teacher, Yuang Pu Chan. No doubt remained. This was his scroll, written ahead of time, waiting to be burned. That evening, as the monks gathered again for prayers, Brahm joined them, though his mind felt split from his body. Each chant felt like an echo in a dream. The air around him thickened with the scent of wax and oil, and the shadows from the candles leaned closer, as if listening. He felt something brush against his shoulder, a faint drift of ash, invisible to all others. He looked down. It was there again, a small smear of black on his robe, fine as dust, cold to the touch. He brushed it away, but the stain clung stubbornly, spreading like smoke through cloth. When he lifted his sleeve to the light, the ash formed faint lines, characters, almost letters. His name, half burned, half formed. The chanting stopped. He hadn't realized he'd been muttering aloud. The monk beside him gave a small nod of concern, unaware of what he saw. He bowed his head, ashamed. But when he looked again, the ash was gone. After prayers, he returned to the record room, desperate to recheck the scroll. Maybe it was gone. Maybe he had imagined it. But when he arrived, the shelves seemed rearranged, the wax seals newer, the dust disturbed, as if invisible hands had been searching too. The same scroll lay open upon the table, unrolled. Only now the vermilion ink had deepened to brown, and the edges burned. There was a small dish beside it, a charcoal bowl used for offering ashes to the wind. Inside it, he saw fragments of burned parchment, the same fiber as the scroll. Someone, or something, had tried to burn it already, but the name remained. Brahm knelt before the altar at the back of the room. It held the statue of the Lord Buddha, serene amid dust and shadow. Around it, smaller figures of old monks sat encased in glass, preserved in eternal meditation. He bowed deeply, his forehead touching the cold stone. I have been named among the dead. If this is a mistake, let it be undone. If it is a sign, teach me what it means. The silence that followed was heavy, not empty, but full, like the pause between two breaths. And then, faintly, the oil lamp beside him flickered once, twice, and went out. The flame did not dim. It disappeared, as if inhaled by something unseen. The darkness that filled the room was not complete. There, above the bowl of ashes, a single ember glowed, forming a line, then a curve. Letters. His name, written in fire. He backed away slowly, but the ember did not follow. It hung there, swaying like a living thought, before collapsing into dust. The smell of burnt cloth rose again. He looked down. His robe, the sleeve nearest his heart, a faint scorch mark blooming outward like something had touched him from within. He left the chamber in silence. Outside, the temple compound lay under moonlight, the air cool, the sound of frogs echoing through the ponds. The bell above him loomed like a black moon. Prom paused beside it and stared upward, the metal cold and gleaming. Beneath that bell lay the chamber of burned names, the place where the scrolls of the departed were consigned to flame, the place he had never entered. He now knew what must be done. He had to find the scroll's origin, and if the prophecy was real, he would burn his name before death could claim it. To die was one thing, but to vanish from memory, that he could not bear. He turned toward his cell, unaware that from the bell's hollow mouth above him, a single fleck of ash had fallen, tracing the air like a small black petal, before landing softly on his shoulder. It stayed there all night, and by dawn it had sunk into the fabric of his robe, as if the fire had chosen him. The night was windless. Even the cicadas had gone quiet, as though the forest itself had stopped breathing. Wat Kimaram slept beneath the silver gaze of the moon, every tile, every prayer flag, every statue steeped in a stillness that felt more like holding its breath than peace. Ajahn Brahm stood at the threshold of the bell tower, its shadow stretching like a pillar into the darkness. The bell itself hung silent above, enormous and blackened by time, its metal lips rimmed with candle soot from countless funerals. In one hand he held a lantern, in the other the scroll, his name, his curse, his fear. He had waited until the others had long since retired. The temple grounds lay deserted, except for the distant crackle of oil lamps and the rhythmic flutter of bats. He stepped forward, the wooden stairs creaking softly beneath his bare feet. The inside of the tower smelled of rust, wax, and something older, the residue of prayer. His fingers brushed the ancient rope that hung from the bell's heart. It was frayed, stiff with years of use. He remembered the first time he had rung it, a novice with trembling arms, his teacher's voice behind him. The bell carries the soul. Ring it with truth, or it will echo false. He had not rung it since. At the base of the bell, half hidden by shadow, lay the trap door, its hinges carved with Sanskrit prayers, its lock sealed by dried wax. Few knew what lay below, fewer dared to look. That was where the fire of names was kept, the small chamber where monks burned the scrolls of the departed to guide their spirits onward. Prom knelt, whispered a short verse of permission. Then, with trembling hands, he pressed his palm against the wax seal. It cracked softly. The door lifted with a breath of air colder than night itself. He raised the lantern. The stairway descended into darkness, a spiral carved into stone, its walls slick with old soot. The air smelled faintly of oil and decay. Shadows flickered like hesitant spirits along the steps as he began his descent. Each step downward was a prayer undone.
The chants from above seemed to fade behind a thick curtain until only the sound of his breathing remained. Down here, the world had no edges, only echoes. At last, the stair opened into a circular chamber, small but immense in feeling. The floor was black and smooth, as though hundreds of years of fire had licked it clean. Around the walls hung hundreds of clay urns, each marked with symbols, ashes of names long gone. In the center stood a stone brazier, its mouth filled with charred scrolls and a bed of gray embers. The fire was low, but still alive. Ajahn Brahm bowed deeply before it. He felt the pulse of something beyond time, a rhythm that was neither living nor dead. He set the lantern down and unrolled his scroll with trembling fingers. The ink glimmered faintly under the flicker of flame, his name looking both sacred and condemned. He whispered, "Let this fire purify false destiny. Let this name return to emptiness." He held the edge of the parchment over the brazier. The fire reached up slowly, like a cautious hand. For a brief heartbeat, he hesitated. He had seen this ritual performed countless times for others. It was meant for those whose bodies had already gone cold, never for the living. To burn one's name while still breathing. It was said to tear the thread of karma, leaving the soul without anchor. But he could not stop. He lowered the scroll. The paper caught. A soft sigh escaped the flame, followed by a shimmer of smoke rising in gentle spirals. The letters of his name blackened, curled, and dissolved into red ash. For a moment, just a moment, he felt relief, light, freedom. Then the fire changed. It deepened, turning blue at its core, whispering like water. A thin voice emerged from the smoke, not a scream, not even a word, but something that remembered him. It was his own voice, echoing from nowhere. "You cannot burn what has already been written." The sound wrapped around the chamber, echoing against the urns until it became a low hum. The air thickened with ash. The lantern flame twisted sideways, as though drawn toward something unseen. Brahm stumbled back, choking, his vision blurred. He saw shapes in the smoke, faces of monks, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent chant. The urns along the wall began to tremble. One by one they cracked. Ash spilled out like black sand. The fire flared high, and for an instant the room filled with the blinding image of thousands of names burning at once, names that whispered his own among them. He shielded his face with his robe. When the fire died back to embers, silence returned. But the scroll was gone. Nothing remained, not even ash. He looked down at his hands. Gray soot stained his fingers, soot that shimmered faintly as though alive. He wiped them on his robe. The stain didn't fade. It sank in, darkening the fabric around his wrists like slow ink. A faint ringing began above him, the temple bell tolling on its own. 1, 2, 3. Each note carried a vibration that crawled through the stone and into his bones. 4, 5. He stared up at the stairway and saw dust falling with every echo, like flakes of burning prayer. Then came the 6th toll, longer, deeper. The kind rung only when a monk's body was laid out for cremation. And yet no one had died. Not yet. When he climbed back to the surface, the moon had shifted west. The courtyard looked unchanged, yet quieter, as though even the insects dared not to return. He stepped out of the bell tower, feeling the night cling to his skin like damp smoke. In the distance, he saw the main shrine, the lanterns still burning, but something was missing: the shadows of the monks, their footsteps, their murmurs. He was alone. He reached out toward the gate, and the wind shifted. A gust lifted the edge of his robe, and from beneath the folds, ash drifted free, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It wasn't the fire's residue. It was him. He stood there, motionless, as the gray dust floated upward, scattering in small, shimmering motes. They caught in the temple wind and vanished into the trees. He looked down again. His shadow was gone. The bell rang once more, and somewhere far below, in the darkness of the chamber, a new scroll appeared within the brazier, blank, except for a single line of fresh red ink slowly writing itself. The one who burned his name will burn forever.
The morning after the fire, Ajahn From woke before the bell. But something was different. The air in his room felt thinner, as if the walls had pulled back slightly in the night. Even the light that filtered through the bamboo slats seemed to hesitate before touching him. He rose from his straw mat and bowed toward the small altar in his room. A simple clay Buddha, a stick of incense, a bowl of cool water. Yet when he tried to chant the morning verse, no sound left his mouth. His lips moved, his breath pushed through, but nothing. No vibration, no resonance, as if his voice belonged to another plane now. He paused, touched his throat. The flesh was warm, soft, alive, and still, silence. Outside, the monastery grounds bustled in the quiet way of monks. Orange robes glided between banyan trees. The sweeping of straw brooms echoed gently across the tiled paths. Birds hopped along the shrine walls, feathers twitching in the breeze. From stepped out barefoot, bowl in hand. He passed two young novices near the temple gate. He bowed. They did not bow back. They walked past him without a glance, as though the air had simply moved around them, as though he were not there. He stood for a moment, unsure, then approached the kitchen hall where meals were prepared for the daily alms round. A line of monks received rice in orderly silence from a lay devotee kneeling on the brick floor. From stepped forward. The woman did not see him. The monk beside her offered a brief blessing and received his portion. From extended his bowl. His arms trembled slightly. Nothing. No rice, no gaze, no presence acknowledged. When he looked down, the bowl was empty, but his arms were not casting a shadow. Later, in the script room where names were transcribed and prayers recorded, he stood before the scroll shelves. The head scribe was there, Venerable Jin, old and nearly blind, but meticulous with ink and flame. He was speaking softly to himself, sorting names for a memorial that afternoon. From knelt before the low desk. "Venerable Jin," he said. No response. He leaned forward. "My name. Check the register, please." Still nothing. So he reached out and pointed. "There," he whispered. "Ajahn From." The old monk's fingers traced the parchment scroll slowly. He stopped. "That section is blank," Jin muttered aloud, confused. "Should be here, but odd. No ink. Perhaps moisture faded it." He moved on. From stared at the parchment. The space where his name once lived, where he had seen it every day, was pale,
untouched. The paper had not been erased, it had simply never been written. He opened the cabinet where novice registration books were kept. Each scroll, each book, each record of ordination and lineage. He had copied many of them himself. He had seen his own vows written a dozen times. Now they were gone. Back in his quarters, shaken and silent, Frome lit a new stick of incense. He placed it upright in the sand-filled bowl before the Buddha statue. It did not burn. The flame flickered. The tip blackened, but no smoke rose. It simply stayed cold, as if the air rejected the offering. He walked to his water bowl and looked into it. No reflection. The surface rippled gently from his movement, yet the image it offered was of the ceiling above, blank, empty, unbothered by the shape that stood before it. That afternoon, as the monks gathered in the main hall for the Namo Tassa chant, Frome entered late. He expected silence, he expected to be ignored. But what he did not expect was the space. No one had taken his usual cushion. It sat there, untouched, though all the others were filled. He moved toward it cautiously. No one looked up. No one stirred. He sat, folded his legs, closed his eyes, and heard the chanting begin, flowing around him, but not through him. It was as though the sound had learned to avoid him, as if it circled his body like a rock in the river. His own voice, when he tried to join, was silent once more. When he opened his eyes, he looked across at the other monks. Their lips moved in harmony. Their brows were serene. Their bodies bowed in prayer. But behind their heads, the air shimmered, like heat or distortion. And in that shimmer, he saw something he had no word for, something like absence wearing the shape of a man. His shape. It mirrored him, sat where he sat, but was not him. He blinked, and it was gone. That evening, he went once more to the death register. The scroll was open on the altar. He did not touch it this time, he only looked. His name was no longer there. Not crossed out, not burned, not overwritten. Just gone. As if it had never existed. He wandered the temple grounds like a ghost, unsure whether he still needed to eat or sleep or breathe. A novice passed by and dropped a handful of lotus petals onto the path. Frome bent to pick one up, but it passed through his fingers. The petal landed in the grass behind him. He looked at his hands. They were still there, still flesh, still warm, but they no longer obeyed the world. Or perhaps the world no longer accepted them. At sunset, he climbed the hill behind the monastery where a smaller shrine stood, rarely visited. From there, he could see the entire temple complex glowing in the amber light of day's end. He watched the monks move below, familiar shapes, familiar gestures, the rhythm of devotion, the poetry of routine. He remembered when he first arrived, how the temple had taken him in after he lost his family to the river, how the chanting had steadied his grief, how the silence had once felt like a friend. Now, the silence was something else. It was erasure. He reached into his robe and pulled out the mala beads he had worn for years, worn smoothed for prayer. But as he held them now, they crumbled. Not into dust, not into ash, but into nothing. The beads disappeared in his hand one by one until only the string remained, frayed and limp, like an old breath. He let it fall to the earth. And in that moment he knew. He had succeeded in burning his name. But he had burned more than that. He had burned his memory, his reflection, his right to be remembered, his place in the story of the world. And now, even the gods had forgotten him.
The temple was breathing without him. Morning light filtered through the Bodhi leaves. The prayer flag stirred gently above the shrine, and the distant chanting of novices echoed off stone walls. The sacred rhythm of Wat Kemarum continued as it always had, unchanged, undisturbed, except for Ajahn Brahm. He sat at the edge of the shrine hall, back straight, hands resting on his knees, trying to enter the breath, in, out, the old way. But the silence inside him was too deep, not meditative, but vacant, hollow. Each time he inhaled, there was no echo of peace, no pulse of Dharma, just a cold quiet that wrapped around his ribs like smoke in reverse. He reached for the incense box beside the altar. It was an old ritual, offering 3 sticks before the morning chant, one for the body, one for the mind, and one for the path. He struck the match. The flame flared briefly. The incense refused to catch. He tried again. New stick, new fire. Still nothing. The tip blackened, yes, but no heat took root, no red glow, no fragrant smoke curling upward to the Buddha. It remained lifeless, like it had never been dipped in oil at all. He stared at it, then at his fingers. The flame no longer recognized him. Still he bowed 3 times. Still he whispered the morning chants for memory, though no sound came. The syllables formed in his throat like ghosts, shaped but never spoken. And when he bowed his head to the floor, he felt the chill of the tiles, not as warmth lost, but as presence denied. Even the floor did not remember his touch. Later that day, he went to the communal prayer hall. A ceremony was underway, a prayer offering for a recently deceased villager. The monks lined up before a long altar, each carrying a folded lotus flower. Candles flickered along the low walls. Saffron robes rustled in the breeze. Brahm entered quietly, hoping just to be, to kneel among them, to find the rhythm again. No one noticed his arrival. He knelt at the end of the line, placed his hands together, closed his eyes, and waited for the chant. It began, as always, with the Anicca verse. All things are impermanent. The chant rose like a tide, soft and sorrowful, flowing through the hall. Brahm opened his mouth to join, but his voice slipped backward into silence. Not a syllable emerged, not even breath. He felt as if the air in his lungs no longer belonged to him. He looked down at the lotus flower he had brought. It was gone. Startled, he searched the floor, his cushion, his robes. Nothing. He had held it only moments ago, a real flower plucked from the temple pond that morning. But now, no trace remained. He reached into his robe for the small clay coin used for merit offerings. Gone. He tried again with the folded scrap of scripture he carried in his sleeve, his teacher's old blessing. Gone. The offerings vanished as if they had never existed, or rather, vanished because he no longer existed within the temple's memory, not truly. That evening, he returned to the incense hall, determined to try once more. He brought new sticks, fresh oil, and a full matchbox. He prepared everything carefully, washing his hands, clearing his thoughts. He knelt, struck the match, lit the incense. This time it burned. A curl of smoke rose, pale and elegant. But something was wrong. The smoke did not rise straight.
It spiraled, then broke apart mid-air, as if repelled by something invisible. The scent was hollow, no trace of sandalwood or temple oil, just the dry, acrid sting of paper left too long in the sun. He offered a bow, and in that moment, the incense vanished. Not burned, not snapped, just gone. The brass holder was empty, the ashes never formed. He blinked. The silence grew deeper. Over the next 3 days, he tested everything. Water offered before the Buddha remained clear but never evaporated, never reflected his image. Candles, once lit, would hold flame for seconds, then extinguish without smoke. Alms bowls filled with rice by lay people, only to be emptied of contents when in his hands. Every act of worship, every gesture of presence, rejected. The rituals refused to acknowledge him. It was not just the monks who forgot. It was the monastery itself. In desperation, Fromm took a small statue of the Buddha from a quiet shrine. He knelt before it and recited the 5 remembrances aloud. I am of the nature to grow old. I am of the nature to fall ill. I am of the nature to die. All that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my karma. No response, not even a flicker of wind. He placed the statue back, and in his hand he noticed a fine dust, gray, grainy, clinging to his palm. He sniffed it. Ash, but not from incense. It smelled faintly of parchment. His scroll, his name, still burning somewhere beyond this world. By the 4th night, he could no longer sleep. Not from fear, but because sleep, too, had forgotten him. His body lay on the straw mat, but no dreams came, no drift, just stillness, as though death waited nearby, confused, unable to find a soul not written in its records. He stared up at the ceiling and whispered into the dark. Is this karma, or is this the absence of karma? What happens when the wheel forgets the spoke? No voice answered, but in the corner of his cell, the shadows shifted slightly. A ripple, a suggestion, something watching, but not watching him, watching the space where he used to be. The next morning he walked the temple grounds like a man who had no weight. The stone path did not echo under his feet. The birds never startled at his passing. The dew on the leaves never wet his robes. He sat under the Bodhi tree. He tried to pray, but now even the tree seemed to lean away.
The dogs barked when he walked past the outer gate. They didn't bark at him, they barked through him. It was late, past evening meditation, past meal, past the point where monks were expected to be anywhere but silent in their cells. But Ajahn Chrom could no longer follow the rules of this world. He was not bound to its hours, nor its rituals, nor even its gaze. So he wandered. Tonight, he walked the narrow path behind the outer shrine, the section of the temple rarely maintained. The old stone was cracked, the fig trees overgrown, their roots swallowing parts of the wall like time reclaiming memory. And that's when he saw him, a boy. Small, barefoot, curled beneath a discolored tarp between the storage hut and the old Bodhi stump. Thin blanket, no mat, no light, just eyes
wide, still, watching him. From froze. He'd grown used to being unseen. Even birds no longer startled. Even his footsteps refused to echo. But the boy was staring directly at him. Eyes dark and wet, like two bowls of ink reflecting firelight. They did not blink. And more strangely, they did not fear him. Not entirely. They recognized him. He stepped forward. The boy didn't move. "Do you see me?" From asked quietly. The boy gave no answer, but did not look away. From tried again. "Can you hear me?" The boy tilted his head, then slowly extended one small finger and pointed directly at From's chest. From looked down. On his robe, over the heart, the ash mark had returned, a faint spiral, a burned coil of gray. It pulsed slightly, like breath through embers. The boy had seen it. The monk knelt cautiously, trying not to disturb the fragile line of connection. "Do you live here?" From asked quietly. The boy gave a small nod. "Do you speak?" No answer. "Are you alone?" Another nod. No fear, no voice, but full awareness. From reached into his sleeve instinctively for a fruit offering. Of course it wasn't there. Nothing remained of his worldly objects. Still, the boy didn't seem to expect anything. Just presence. A slow realization began to form. This child was not part of the monastery. He had no robes, no bowl, no cushion. Yet he remained, unnoticed by monks, unseen by visitors, alive only in the forgotten corners, like From. He gestured gently toward the child's corner. "May I sit?" The boy scooted slightly, making room. They sat beneath the dark fig tree, the leaves above rustling like slow speech. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was ancient, like two shadows recognizing each other by shape. Then the boy did something unexpected. He reached into his bag and pulled out a single stick of broken incense. Snapped in half, the wood splintered, the tip blackened. He held it out with both hands. A gift. From hesitated. Then carefully, he accepted it. The moment his fingers touched the incense, a breeze stirred, and the scent, so faint, so fleeting, rose from the snapped stick like a lost memory. Real smoke, his first in days. The boy smiled, then reached into the dirt beside him, and with one finger drew a symbol, a circle, then a line through it, then a smaller circle inside. From stared. It was not a word, not a known script, but he understood it. It meant between death and life, between seen and unseen, between memory and forgetting. From met the boy's eyes. "You see me because you are between too." The boy gave a solemn nod. That night, From returned again, and again the next. The boy never spoke, never smiled wide, never asked questions, but he always pointed, toward the ash on From's robe, toward the temple bell, toward the brazier of names, and always toward the sky. From didn't understand at first.
Until one night, during their silent sitting, the boy pointed upward again, this time more urgently. The clouds were rolling back, and between them the moon emerged. But it was wrong. It was ash gray, not silver, not white, gray as bone dust. And on its surface, briefly, From saw a mark, a symbol, a coil of fire. His name, written in silence across the face of the sky. The boy stood then, turned, and pointed not at the moon, but toward the cemetery behind the temple. He took 3 steps and looked back, waiting, guiding. They walked together, From barefoot, the boy light as a leaf, past the wall, past the broken gate, into the grove where old monks were buried beneath stone stupas and slabs inscribed with chants. Here the wind was louder, not angry, just persistent, like it had waited a long time for someone to return. At the far edge of the graveyard stood a tree, small, twisted, its roots wrapped around a cracked stone tablet. The boy walked to it, knelt, brushed away moss and ash. Then he stepped back. From knelt in turn. And there, beneath the grime, beneath the soil, was a name. His own, carved into the stone, weathered, but unmistakable. A death marker. But the date was in the future. 1 week from now. He traced the glyphs with shaking fingers. His name, his temple, his title, and beneath it, a space left blank, as if the ritual had not yet been completed, as if they were waiting for him to die. He looked at the boy. The boy was staring not at him now, but past him. From turned. Behind him, in the trees, were shapes. Faint, clothed in robes, eyes closed, mouths moving in silent chant. The forgotten monks. Those who had erased themselves, burned their scrolls, vanished from the world of memory. Each stood alone. None looked at the others. None looked at him. They simply drifted, like incense without source, like prayers no one remembered to speak. The boy did not follow as From stood. Instead, he pointed one final time to From's feet. Ash was spreading from the soles upward, coating his toes, climbing his legs, as if the stone itself had decided to claim him. From looked to the boy in desperation. How do I undo this? The boy only placed a hand over his own heart, then over his throat, then his forehead. 3 silent gestures, and then he vanished. From was alone again, kneeling before his own unfinished grave, ash rising like breath around him, and the echo of the boy's hand motions burned behind his eyes. Heart, voice, mind. He had to return them. He had to be remembered by one living soul. He had to undo the silence, or be pulled into the grave before it even opened. That night, when sleep finally came, it was not soft. It arrived like a wave of cold wind through an open temple door, carrying with it the scent of old ink, burned silk, and something older than memory.
Ajahn Brahm did not dream. He entered something, a space that pulsed like breath and weighted like stone, a corridor made of parchment. The walls were not walls, they were scrolls, endless scrolls, stacked to the heavens, floating without end. Each one whispered, not in sound, but in recognition, names, prayers, departed, remembered, freed, and then silence. Where his name should have been, nothing. A blank in the rhythm, a breath not taken. He walked. His bare feet touched nothing, and yet he moved forward. The further he went, the more the scrolls changed. The early ones were golden, soft, glowing with merit. Then came those grayed with sorrow, cut short by war, famine, illness. And then, darker still, charred scrolls, half-burned names, letters that unraveled mid-stroke. These were the erased. He paused before one such scroll, its edges blackened, the center scorched away. In the void left behind, he saw a faint face, a monk. Eyes open, mouth sewn shut by strands of prayer beads, a face without voice. And then another, and another, dozens, hundreds, each one suspended in parchment, held by nothing, remembered by no one. These were not the damned, they were the disconnected, the ones who thought they could cut their karma short, escape the fire by burning first. Instead, they became ashes between realms. Suddenly, the scrolls shuddered. A wind tore through the corridor, not from ahead, but from behind. It was cold, sharp, full of teeth. He turned. At the far end, the death register was unrolling itself, giant, living, sacred. The parchment stretched across the void, its calligraphy alive with movement. Names flowed forward like a river of flame. He saw. Luang Ki Marut returned to the cycle. Mai Jariya, freed by prayer. Ajahn Sene, remembered by song. Layperson Khan, carried by child's tears. Each name a farewell, each name a rite, until it reached the blank space, the place where his name should have been. The scroll paused, twitched. Then it bled. Ink poured from the empty line like an open wound. The scroll began to tear itself. Syllables from other names spilled into the void, trying to fill it, trying to stitch a soul back into place. But the blankness rejected them. And in that moment, Brahm heard a voice, not spoken, not chanted, written. The scroll was not your chain, it was your passage. You broke the door and sealed yourself out. He fell to his knees. Before him now stood a monk, cloaked in soot, face hidden behind burned parchment. His hands were ink-stained, his feet did not touch the floor. Where his heart should have been was an empty seal. He opened his robe. Inside were names, all carved into flesh. Every name he had ever transcribed. Every monk he had ever copied scrolls for, every soul he had helped carry onward. And at the bottom, a space left blank. Brahm's space. The monk raised a finger, bony, gray, long, and pointed it at Brahm's chest. And the ash mark over Brahm's heart began to burn, not with heat, but with memory. He saw his ordination, his first vow, his first mistake, his first silence, and then the moment beneath the bell where he lit the fire and chose to disappear. He cried out, but no sound came. The inkless monks around him turned. Their mouths did not open, but their scrolls screamed. Suddenly, the corridor collapsed. The parchment became sky. The ink became water. The names blew apart like autumn leaves. He was falling, down through torn sutras, down past drifting urns, down into a darkness shaped like a page that no longer needed to be turned. And just before the silence swallowed him, he heard a bell. Once, twice, thrice. He awoke, cold sweat on his back, the ash on his chest now a clear spiral, deep, carved, glowing faintly. He sat up, looked around his room. Everything was still. But on the floor, by the door, was a scroll, rolled tightly, bound in red thread. He picked it up with shaking hands, unrolled it, and found written in fresh black ink, "The one who curses the scroll shall be forgotten by the gods." No signature, no seal, no escape. He burned his name, thinking he would be free, but now he knew the scroll did not curse him. He cursed himself by not trusting the ritual meant to carry him home. And now he was neither living nor dead, only unwritten.
Morning returned, but it did not feel like morning. The sun broke through the mist with gentle warmth, spilling golden light onto the rooftops of Wat Kemaram. The bells rang for the dawn offering, a deep, familiar gong that echoed through the banyan trees. But Ajahn Brahm heard only the shape of the sound, not the vibration, not the life within it, just a hollow outline, like hearing the memory of a bell after it stops ringing. He stepped out of his room and walked into the courtyard. Monks were already gathering. They stood in lines, palms together, eyes lowered, ready to receive the alms from the village devotees. Brahm stood beside them. No one noticed, not even when he bowed in perfect rhythm, not even when his bare feet touched the dust in sync with the others. The silence that followed him had grown denser. Not just absence of voice, not just absence of memory, but absence of consequence. He moved through the world like a name scratched out of stone. He walked past the bell tower, and it rang again, louder, clearer. And yet, it did not move the leaves. It did not rattle the tiles. It did not stir the air. Only Brahm turned to look. And as he stared up at the bronze giant, he saw, just for a moment, the rope swinging by itself. Not from the wind, not from a monk, from nothing. And in the silence that followed, the rope stopped mid-air, frozen, then slowly coiled upward like a serpent climbing back into heaven. Inside the chanting hall, the midday prayers had begun.
Prome entered. He stepped between the rows of monks, careful not to disturb the flow, even though he knew now he could not disturb what no longer felt him. He knelt in the back row, folded his legs, closed his eyes, and listened. The monks began to chant the Metta Sutta, the verses of loving kindness. The sound rose like incense, delicate and strong. Prome opened his mouth, tried to join. Nothing. Not even the ghost of breath. But this time, it was not just him who felt the break. The monk beside him, a young novice with sharp eyes, paused mid-chant. He blinked, turned his head slightly, as if he had felt something move in the air beside him. But when he looked directly where Prome sat, his eyes passed through the space, and the pause ended. The chant resumed. The silence thickened again. Prome stood. He walked between rows of chanting monks. No one flinched. He passed through incense smoke, but it did not cling to him. He passed beneath oil lamps, but they cast no shadow where he moved. He reached the altar, stared at the statue of the Buddha, carved from black teak, centuries old, its face calm and open to all beings. Prome knelt before it, folded his hands, and whispered with all the breath he could summon, "See me. I am still here. I remember your name, though mine is gone." The Buddha's gaze remained unchanged, but in the flame of the nearest lamp, something shifted. A flicker, a faint pulse of gold, and then the flame dipped, extinguished, not from wind or lack of oil, but as if something unseen had leaned forward and listened, and then turned away. Prome stayed kneeling long after the chanting ended. When he rose, the hall was empty. Even the incense had burned itself down to nothing. He stepped outside and saw a bird land on the branch above. He raised his hand slowly. It did not startle. It did not fly. But it did not look at him either. Just pecked the branch, turned its head, flew off. He could no longer even startle the simplest creature. He walked to the record room, where scrolls were copied, stored, and read for memorials. He opened a drawer where he remembered placing the monastic attendance ledger. He ran his fingers along the entries. Luang Pi Marut, present. Venerable Anand, present. Novice Pricha, present. His own name, absent. He turned the page, then the next, then the next. Not crossed out, not erased, simply never written. He looked over at the ink brush lying on the wooden desk. He dipped it into the ink, reached to write his name in the margin, but as he moved the brush, the ink vanished mid-stroke. He tried again. The paper remained blank. He stood in front of the mirror room, a side chamber where monks meditated on impermanence by gazing at themselves until the body dissolved in their vision. He opened the old glass-paneled door, sat before the mirror. Nothing. Not a reflection, not a blur, not a shadow, not a flicker of light. Only the room behind him, perfect and still. He reached out and touched the mirror. His fingers left no mark, no warmth, no oil, just silence. And as he sat, the mirror began to fog, only slightly, not from his breath, but from within. Words formed on the glass, backwards, upside down, but he read them. Prayer without memory is wind without sky. That night, he did not return to his room. He walked the temple grounds barefoot until the sky turned black. He sat beneath the great Bodhi tree, alone, unheard, unseen, and yet something watched, not malevolent, not cruel, but empty. Something like the space between prayers, like the second between bell strikes. He looked up at the stars and for the first time wondered, what happens to a soul that no longer belongs to heaven, to earth, or to name? And the stars, silent as ash, did not answer.
He no longer counted the days. The temple bells rang, but their notes no longer pierced his skin. The sun rose and set, but the warmth didn't touch his bones. He still walked, still bowed, still mimicked the rituals. But the silence inside him had changed. It was no longer the absence of sound. It was the presence of forgetting. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree one evening, long after the monks had returned to their quarters. The wind moved through the leaves gently, like a whispered chant without breath. He watched them sway, their edges catching moonlight. He remembered the scripture. Even the leaf that falls is remembered by the root. But he was not a leaf anymore. He had cut his own root. That night, the dream returned, but it was no longer a corridor of parchment. It was a wheel, gigantic, infinite, spinning in silence. The wheel of samsara. Each spoke made of names, each turn a birth, a death, a lesson, a cycle. He walked toward it, but the closer he got, the slower it turned, until it stopped. A single spoke was missing, not broken, burned. He looked at the empty gap. He knew. It was where his name once belonged. And then he heard the voice again, not loud, not cruel, just still. To be forgotten is not the punishment. To forget yourself is. He woke before dawn, heart hollow, mouth dry. He went to the abbot's library, a sacred place guarded by age and silence. No monk had invited him, but no monk saw him enter. The scrolls there were older than the temple itself, wisdom from the northern jungles, mountain retreats, cave temples where silence spoke louder than sermons. He searched until his fingers bled from turning pages, and then he found it. A line buried within a forgotten commentary on funerary rites. He who burns his own death scroll before the hour severs his karma from the wheel. He shall not be reborn, nor shall he be remembered. His merit will bleed through the gaps of time. His ghost shall not haunt, for even the spirits will not know his name. Prom dropped the manuscript. The parchment cracked, and in the dust that rose, he saw, briefly, a flicker of a figure.
cloaked in robes, without a face, holding a scroll that unraveled as he watched, and at the bottom, the final line, "To vanish is worse than to die." He fled the library. The temple looked different now, not haunted, just apathetic. The birds did not sing. The wind did not move the flags. The lanterns remained lit but gave no warmth. The stone did not echo his feet, and he felt for the first time that the world itself had moved on without him. He stood before the Buddha statue that evening and tried to weep, but no tears came. Even grief had abandoned him. So he asked, not in voice, but in thought, "If karma binds the soul, then where do the unbound go?" And the silence answered, "Nowhere." He remembered his teacher's words again. A monk dies 3 times, once in the world, once in the name, and once when the Dharma no longer sees him. Prom had thought he was escaping fate, but in truth, he had escaped grace. He was a shadow without anchor, a story with no tongue, a prayer that would never be repeated. He walked to the old graveyard where the orphan boy had first shown him the stone bearing his name. It was still there, but now the glyphs had deepened. The date had changed, not to the future, but to the past. The stone now claimed he had died 3 years ago. He touched the surface. It was cold, firm, true. He whispered, "Then who have I been all this time?" The wind did not answer, but the ash mark on his chest pulsed once, deep, final. He sat in meditation beside his own grave, and for the first time he saw them, the others, the monks who had erased themselves, dozens, hundreds, sitting like statues under the earth. Not angry, not vengeful, just unfinished, unrecognized. They did not speak, they did not pray. They simply existed outside of karma, outside of merit, outside of name. And Prom understood. He had not sinned by fearing death. He had sinned by fearing remembrance. He had broken the cycle not out of courage, but because of selfishness, to avoid suffering, to avoid being mourned, to avoid matter. But now he mattered less than nothing. He opened his robes, looked at the mark over his heart. It had changed. Now it was no longer a spiral of ash. It was a seal, empty, where the name should be. He bowed to the grave, to the others, to the air, and whispered, "I return. I accept the weight of my name. Let the Dharma remember me once more." But the wind was still, the god silent, and the wheel did not turn. Not yet.
Ghost Festival came with the waning moon. It began quietly, as it always did, with the wind growing cooler, the temple bells sounding heavier, and the scent of old ashes rising from the crevices between stones. Lanterns were prepared in the shrine hall, dozens of them, each hand-painted with symbols of passage. Lotus petals, dharma wheels, the faces of ancestors drawn in fading ink. Their paper shells glowed soft red, resting atop bamboo sticks tied with gold twine. Each lantern was a light for the dead, a guide through the dark, a soft voice saying, "You are remembered. You may go." Ajahn Brahm stood in the corner, watching as the monks gathered. They moved with purpose, yet calm,
bodies synchronized, hearts aligned. One by one, they stepped forward to receive their lanterns from the abbot. Each monk whispered the name of the soul they carried, father, sister, teacher, child, before taking the flame. Prom stepped forward too, but the abbot's gaze never met his. His hands passed over Prom as if parting air, and the lantern was never offered. Still, Prom did not stop. He made his way to the rear of the hall, where unclaimed lanterns were stacked in a basket. They were reserved for the forgotten, those with no living to carry their names. He chose one, small, red, its edges curled by humidity, the symbol of the moon barely visible on its surface. He held it close, whispered softly, "For the one whose name was burned before the fire was meant to come." His own voice startled him. It came out raw, dry, real. But no one turned. Outside, night had fallen fully. The monks formed a procession across the courtyard, each lantern glowing like a prayer in motion. They made their way toward the river that ran past the temple's edge, where the final ritual would be performed. The sky was moonless, the trees whispered, the air smelled of rain that hadn't yet arrived. Prom followed them. Not beside, not behind, but within, like a shadow that didn't belong to any figure. At the river's edge, the monks recited the suttas of safe passage, verses meant to guide the spirits as they crossed from one shore of existence to the next. Prom stood at the far end of the dock. He knelt, unfolded the small flint box, lit a match. The flame flickered, but only for a breath. The flame disappeared, snuffed not by wind, but by refusal. He tried again. A second match, a third, a fourth. Each flared for a moment and then surrendered. The wick would not catch. The paper would not glow. The fire would not remember him. He cupped the lantern in both hands, holding it close to his chest. He breathed on it like one trying to warm life into a dying bird. Still, the flame refused him. All around him, lanterns were being placed upon the water. They floated away slowly, their reflections trailing behind like echoes of footsteps. Dozens, then hundreds, each one carrying a name, a sorrow, a final bow. Prom stood with his unlit lantern, watching them go. His hands trembled. He knelt again and whispered, "Please, I am not trying to escape now. I am trying to return." And for the first time, his voice cracked. The air around him stilled. The trees stopped whispering, and the surface of the water smoothed like polished stone. He struck one last match, held it to the lantern. It flared, then burst. Not in fire, in ash. The lantern crumbled in his hands, collapsed in on itself, dissolved into powder. The paper didn't burn. It disappeared, like it had never been made, like he had never asked to be carried. The monks chanted the final line, "May all be free, may all be light, may all be released." Prom opened his palms. There was nothing left to release. He stood staring at the river. The water was covered in glowing dots, tiny spirits sailing home. And yet, when he looked closely, he saw. Each lantern cast a reflection, but there was no reflection of him. Not in the river, not in the water, not in the lantern light. He stood in the middle of it all, without mirror, without flame, without name. Then something touched his arm. He turned. The boy was there again, the orphan who lived behind the temple, silent, barefoot, small. He held something in his hands, a shard of broken lantern, half of one scorched around the edges, useless except the symbol on it was still intact. A single brush stroke, Prom's name, written in faded black ink, just one glyph. The boy extended it gently. Prom took it, hands shaking. The boy pointed to the water, then to the fire, then to his own chest. Then he bowed and walked away. Prom knelt for the final time, held the shard in his palms, pressed it to his heart, and closed his eyes. He did not light it. He could not. But he remembered it, fully, completely, with sorrow and reverence. And the moment he did, he heard something behind him. A single splash. He turned. One lantern, just one, floated from the shore, flickering, faint, unmarked, but drifting slowly, as if it carried a name no one else could see. Prom bowed to it, deeply, the first true bow in days, perhaps years. He did not know if it was for him, or for all the forgotten, or for the one who burned before his time, but it glowed a little brighter and drifted on.
The morning began with the rustle of robes and the hush of breath. The monks filed out of Wat Kemaram in single line, barefoot, silent, heads lowered, each one carrying a black alms bowl, ready to receive the day's merit from the village. The bowl was not just a vessel for rice, it was a ritual of humility, a way for monks to allow the lay people to give, and in doing so, gather their own merit for the path ahead. To receive was to allow others to practice generosity. To eat was to honor the thread between this world and the next. Ajahn Brahm walked among them. Though no one motioned for him to join, no one stopped him either. He moved into step, tried to align his breath to theirs, but their rhythm no longer reached him. He held his own alms bowl carefully. It was old, well used, black lacquer faded at the edges, the same one he'd carried for years. Now it felt heavier than before. Not with rice, but with absence. They reached the village. The sun had just crested over the rooftops, casting golden light across the wooden porches and open doors. Women knelt on straw mats, holding warm baskets of rice, bananas, and sweet tamarind. Children peeked out from behind pillars. Dogs lay at the edge of the road, sleepy-eyed and loyal. As each monk passed, the villagers bowed low. They scooped rice with quiet hands, whispered blessings under breath, placed fruit gently into the bowls. And with each gift, the monks murmured, "Sadhu, may your merit be full." The ritual flowed like a river until it reached Prom. The first woman smiled at the monk before him, then looked past him. No bow, no blessing. She returned her gaze to the path, and the next monk stepped forward. Prom stood there, bowl open, hands steady, heart unsure. He waited. She never looked up.
He stepped to the next house. Another woman, another basket, another moment. He bowed. She glanced at him and blinked, like looking into sunlight, then turned her eyes away, confused, unsettled, perhaps not even knowing why. No rice, no merit, no recognition. He moved on, house after house, kneeling figures, gentle hands, soft chants, and yet none touched his bowl, not a grain, not a seed, not a word. The bowl became a mirror, reflecting what he had become, a vessel with no name to hold, a body with no karma to carry. By the end of the street, his arms ached, not from weight, but from holding emptiness. The last house had a little girl, no more than 5, kneeling with her grandmother. The old woman placed mango in the bowl of the monk before her. The girl smiled, turned, and for a heartbeat saw Pram. Her eyes widened, not in fear, not in joy, in recognition, like something hidden behind the curtain of life had flickered briefly. She reached out with a small piece of sticky rice, fingers trembling, but the grandmother grabbed her wrist gently, pulling her back. "Don't give to shadows. They must find their own offering," the old woman whispered. The girl looked down. The rice fell from her hand, and Pram's bowl remained empty. He stepped away from the road into the narrow footpath behind the village, where the trees pressed close and the world grew quiet again. He sat beneath a tamarind tree and placed the bowl on the ground. It made no sound when it touched the dirt. He stared into it. Black, hollow, a small void. He remembered something the abbot once said during a Dhamma talk. The bowl is not just for food, it is the self. When we empty it, we are ready to receive truth. But when we destroy the self, there is no bowl left to hold anything at all. Pram touched the rim and wept, not with tears, but with ache. The ache of realizing that to be invisible was not freedom. It was starvation of the soul. He sat there as the sun climbed higher. Flies buzzed, birds cawed. His stomach made no sound, not because it was full, but because it had stopped expecting. By midday, he wandered back toward the temple, bowl still clutched in hand. On the way, he passed a stream. He looked into the water. Still no reflection. Only the bowl, faintly visible, held just above the surface, suspended between worlds. He turned it upside down, poured out the emptiness, let it fall. The bowl drifted into the current and slowly floated away. He watched it until it disappeared around a bend. No weight left in his arms, no offering left to take. He walked the rest of the path in silence, not hungry, not full, just absent. And as he stepped back into the temple gate, he thought, "How can I be nourished when I've burned the very name that the rice would have known?"
The prayer hall had not been used in years. It sat at the edge of the temple grounds, past the bell tower and behind the overgrown lotus pond. Its roof sagged slightly, covered in moss and old leaves. Vines curled through the cracks in the pillars. The doors groaned when touched. It was once used for solitary reflection, the kind of chanting done not for ceremony, but for the soul.
Now, it waited like a forgotten room in the body of a man who no longer dreamed, and Ajahn Brahm stepped inside. The air was stale, but not foul, still, but not dead. Dust floated in golden columns where the sunlight pierced the lattice. The floor creaked beneath his weight. He walked to the center and knelt on the worn mat, its fibers frayed but familiar. He placed his palms together, closed his eyes, and drew in a breath. The Sutra of Return was not often spoken. It was reserved for monks lost in doubt, for those who had strayed from the Eightfold Path, for those who had forgotten their name not by accident, but by desire. The words were ancient, soft, circling, meant to spiral inward until one touched the thread that tied the soul to memory. He had copied it once, long ago. His brush had trembled as he wrote. Now he opened his mouth and whispered the first line. I have stepped beyond the gate of name. Nothing. No voice. Only the dry movement of his tongue against silence. He tried again. I seek the echo of my vow. Still nothing. The hall did not reject him. It simply did not answer. But he did not stop. He closed his eyes again, felt the shape of the chant inside his chest, not as sound, but as intention. May the wind carry my name, even if only the bones remember. His lips moved, his breath shook, and this time, a sound returned, faint, delayed, like a pebble dropped into a deep well. An echo. His own voice, but distant, hollow, like it had traveled through time to reach him. He opened his eyes. No one was there. No shadow in the corner. No figure in the doorway. But he felt it now. Presence. The kind that sits just behind the veil of seeing. Something, somewhere, was listening. He bowed his head and continued. I was once a name. I burned it. I ask now not to rewrite it, but to remember it myself. Again, the words came back. Stronger, clearer, like water returning to a dry streambed. His voice was not fully restored, but it had a companion now, an echo that stayed near. He chanted the next stanza with more breath. What is name but a path? What is silence but forgetting? What is flame but the memory of form? The wind stirred through the broken window slats. Dust shifted, and the echo returned not just as sound, but as shape. A second voice, not his. A second chant, low, gentle, hollow, repeating his words, not mocking, not haunting, but mirroring. He paused, turned. Nothing there. Only the flicker of candlelight from a long dead shrine. But he felt it. Another monk, or something once monk-shaped, chanting with him. Still trapped, still circling, still trying to be known. He continued, may the chant return me to the wheel. May the breath carry the syllables. May the Dharma remember my footfall. And now the echo responded immediately. A duet of silence and voice. two streams converging in the dark. Tears rose not from fear, but from being heard, even if only by the forgotten, even if only by a soul as lost as his own. He stayed in that prayer hall until the sky turned orange. Each verse pulled more breath from him. Each echo returned fuller. Not whole, not alive, but witnessed. And when the chant ended, he bowed deeply. His forehead touched the mat. The dust clung to his skin. And in that moment, he heard the faintest whisper behind him. Prom. Not loud, not spectral. Just one word. His name, spoken by something he could not see. He turned. No one was there, but the air now carried weight, like someone had stood, had spoken, and left. He looked down at his hands. They were no longer coated in ash, just skin, dry, alive. He flexed his fingers, and for the first time in weeks, they left a mark when they touched the floor. A shadow, faint, but there. He left the hall in silence, but now it was his silence, not the void, not the punishment, but a pause, a breath, the space before sound returns.
The sky was bruised with the color of departing rain. Clouds hung low over Wat Kimerum. The air was thick with stillness, as if the entire world were holding its breath for something sacred or final. Ajahn Brahm stood beneath the ancient Bodhi tree, alone. Its wide branches reached above him like arms too old to lift, but too sacred to rest. The leaves shivered with the soft rhythm of wind, small, fluttering sounds like the pages of a scripture turning by themselves. This is where it had to be, where he would try again, not to burn, but to restore. He had gathered the items himself, a torn scrap of blank parchment, a bowl of temple ink, a small clay burner filled with crushed sandalwood and sacred oil, a single stick of incense carved by hand from the fig tree behind the shrine, and in the center of it all, ash, collected slowly, from the hall, from the steps, from the prayer mat where his name had once been spoken aloud. He placed it into the burner, then knelt before it, hands trembling. He took up the brush, dipped it in ink, but this time he did not write on parchment. He dipped the brush again and lifted it toward the air, drawing lines into smoke. One stroke, another, then a curve, a name. Not visible to the eye, but felt like a prayer whispered through steam. Prom. He said it out loud, softly, and the smoke moved, not just upward, but outward, like it heard, like it remembered. The flame in the burner flickered, rose higher, took shape. He continued to trace. No ink, no parchment, just intention, a signature of soul written in warmth. He dipped his finger into the ash, pressed it gently to his chest, over the old mark, the place where the seal had been burned. And for a moment it shimmered, not with light, but with recognition.
the wind picked up. It circled the base of the tree, lifting the petals that had fallen from nearby shrines. One petal landed in the burner. It caught fire, and from it rose a thread of smoke, clearer than before. Within the smoke, a glyph began to form. One line, then another. The character for Prum. Not drawn, not spoken, but risen, like steam rising from a body returning to warmth. He knelt lower, bowed deeper. The sutra returned to his lips, not from memory, but from presence. Let the name be a bridge between forgetting and return. Let it rise, let it speak, let it be smoke, let it be sky. And as he chanted, the smoke began to rise in spirals, higher, broader, not fading. It drifted into the air like incense, but carried weight, pattern, meaning. A scripture not copied, but lived. A name not spoken, but returned. Behind him he felt the breeze shift. Footsteps, small, bare. He turned. The boy was standing at the edge of the tree's shadow, watching, silent as ever, but smiling now. And in his hands, a new scroll, bound in red string, unburned, unopened. The boy stepped forward and placed it on the ground, then knelt beside Prum. Together they bowed to the smoke, to the name, to the space between. The scroll did not open. It did not need to. Its presence was enough. Prum reached out, touched the string, and as he did, the wind carried the smoke upward. It spun once, twice, and then scattered. Not as ashes, but as script. Each wisp carried a letter, each curl a memory, each gust a syllable once forgotten. They rose into the branches, into the sky, into the waiting. He closed his eyes, felt breath fill his lungs, real breath, the first in weeks that did not feel borrowed. He touched his chest. The mark was gone. No ash, no seal, only skin, warm, alive. He turned to the boy, but he was gone. Only a faint footprint in the dirt remained, and the scroll, still sealed, still waiting. Prum picked it up, held it to his heart, and whispered, "Thank you." As he stood, the Bodhi leaves began to fall, just a few, drifting slowly like blessings. One landed in the burner. It caught fire, and from it rose a thread of smoke, clearer than before. The smoke was gone, but the air smelled sweet, and far above, in the highest bough, a single bird sang.
The world felt lighter, not because its weight had lifted, but because he had learned how to carry it again. The morning breeze slipped through the temple corridors with purpose. It rustled the bamboo chimes. It stirred the hem of robes hanging from windowsills. It traced the lines of Ajahn Fram's face as he walked, barefoot, steady, quiet. He held the scroll close to his chest, the one the boy had left, unopened, unburned, untouched by ritual hands.
It was not a scroll of warning. It was a gift. A name not written by fear, but by return. The monks passed him without pause. But today one of them slowed. A young novice, no older than the boy. Eyes like wet stone. He glanced at From and for the briefest second hesitated. His lips parted. He didn't speak, but he saw. And that was enough. From turned toward the bell tower. The path there had once been terrifying. Now it felt like coming home. The door creaked open. The stair groaned. The air smelled of sandalwood and dust and completion. He descended, one step at a time, deeper and deeper, until he stood again before the sacred brazier. It still glowed faintly, a memory of fire waiting to receive one last breath. From knelt, unbound the red thread from the scroll, unrolled it slowly, and smiled. Inside, the parchment was blank, but as the smoke from the brazier curled upward, letters began to rise on the page, faint, gentle, fluid. His name, his vow, his path, all written in invisible ink that only memory could reveal. He held the scroll above the flame, whispered, "Not to be erased, not to be feared, but to be remembered, by wind, by sky, by ash." And gently he let it go. The scroll touched the flame. It caught, without violence, burned softly like a prayer. Smoke rose, not harsh, not thick, graceful. The name lifted, letter by letter, into the air. And then the ash fell, slow, sacred, each flake drifting like a snow of remembrance. He reached out, caught one in his hand. It dissolved on contact, into warmth. Not cold, not absence, but blessing. He climbed the stairs. Outside, the courtyard was bathed in golden light. Monks moved in quiet procession. A bell rang. This time, it echoed inside him, a vibration in his ribs, a sound he could feel. And as he stepped into the open, a breeze blew through the Bodhi tree. Leaves shimmered, chimes sang, and in the middle of the courtyard, the abbot stood, facing him. Old eyes, still and deep. From bowed. The abbot did not speak, but for the first time in many days, he bowed back. As From walked toward his room, children outside the temple laughed. One ran past him with a spinning toy. She glanced back and waved. He stopped, stunned. The child smiled. "Hello, Venerable." She said it softly, without fear, without confusion, as if he had always been there. That night, he lit a single candle in his room. The flame held. He placed 3 sticks of incense into the sand. They burned. He bowed to the Buddha. And when he looked into the small copper bowl of water on his altar, his reflection looked back. Not bright, not perfect, but true. And in the silence that followed, he felt no weight, no cold, no punishment, just peace. Outside, the last ash from the scroll danced upward, caught in the temple wind, rising above the rooftops, past the bell tower, beyond the prayer flags, until it vanished into sky. Not as a curse, but as a name that had finally found its way home.